You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. India's retail inflation rises to a 16-month high, led by a spike in food and vegetable prices due to unseasonal rainfall. The Department of Telecom issues notices to telecom operators to pay up their revenue share dues within 3 months, as per the Supreme Court directive last month. The rupee sees its biggest one-day fall since September on Wednesday, closes below the mark of 72 against the US dollar. SpiceJet reports a higher than estimated net loss in the September quarter due to high costs and higher forex losses. And ONGC, Vedanta, Bharti Airtel and Grasim will be the 4 nifty companies reporting their second quarter earnings today. Let's talk about the US markets now. Benchmark indices on Wall Street continued to see small moves on Wednesday. However, both the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 closed at record high levels. Abigail Doolittle of Bloomberg News sums up Wednesday's Wall Street action in this report.
It was another day of small moves for stocks in Wednesday's Wall Street session. That being said, the Dow did climb to a record high by climbing by about 0.3%. The S&P 500 up fractionally, the tech-heavy Nasdaq down fractionally. So overall, small moves, even as Fed Chair Jerome Powell did testify before Congress. Traders, investors assessing that the Fed Chair did not say anything all that new. Now, where we did see a bigger move, though, bonds, the 10-year yield down about 5 basis points. Price trades inverse to yield, so that tells you yields were rallying. And that had a big influence on the sector composition for the S&P 500. 6 sectors higher, 5 lower. Up top, though, 2 of the most defensive sectors, utilities and real estate. Those sectors do carry high dividends, and those stocks do well when yields rates are lower. So we saw that on the day. In addition, we saw financials on bottom, the worst sector on the day, down about 0.6%. This, of course, as yields did drop, and investors tend to think that will weigh on the lending activities of banks. As for some of the outsized movers beneath the surface, we did have the shares of Disney popping sharply higher, up 7.3%. In fact, carving out a new all-time high. This on the news that they gained 10 million subscribers since launching their Disney Plus streaming service yesterday, again causing those shares to go to a record high. Also pushing, though, Netflix down about 3% on the day, down for a second day in a row as the streaming wars intensify. Another big mover on the day, Amazon down more than 1% on the news that Nike is ending its wholesaler relationship with the e-commerce giant. Nike, on the other hand, though, did pop on that news. And when we turn to other asset classes, including commodities, overall flat, similar to stocks, but beneath that service, both natural gas and oil popping higher on some cold weather that we're having here in the U.S. But overall, risk appetite was about neutral, given small moves for stocks and a slightly larger rally for bonds. From New York, Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News.
All right, let's also turn to the Asia-Pacific region. I'm joined live by Rosalind Chin from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Rosalind, lots happening and lots to talk about with regard to Hong Kong as well. We'll be dealing with that very shortly. But how are the markets looking as of now?
Right now looking pretty mixed. Not really a lot for investors to go on, given the lackluster finish on Wall Street overnight. So we're seeing right now the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is losing just over 0.1%. We've got some data out from China, though, which could entirely change the mood. Industrial production is out a little bit later at 10 a.m. In fact, so maybe about 25 minutes from now. And also retail sales. So we'll have to watch for those numbers. That could, of course, move the dial a little bit in terms of what the markets will be doing today. We've got, of course, again, a little bit more uncertainty creeping in regarding the trade situation, the offshore yuan, a key indicator of sentiment around China extending its retreat further away from that 7 level, and some of the major Asian currencies also following it, tracking lower as well. Korea's market, the Kospi, opened an hour later than normal due to the national college exams. This is, of course, a regular occurrence in Korea, where the markets open for trade a little bit later because of that. So right now we've got the Nikkei only up by a little bit, up by 0.05%, while the Topix is pointing the other direction. direction, losing 0.25%. The Kospi it's currently at 0.4, but I think that number is moving very slightly now, making gains still. The Hang Seng Index is losing 0.16%, and the Shanghai Composite opened a little bit higher. It is now making gains of about 1/5%, as is the CSI 300 index, as we await that data coming out of China. Now, Hong Kong, of course, yes, a lot going on here. I just want to mention, aside from the protests, one of the big losers today is Tencent. Tencent, the third most heavily weighted component of the Hang Seng Index, fell more than 2%. That's after its third quarter profit missed estimates. That and landlords such as Swire, Wharf. I'm also seeing Swire Pacific making losses here on the Hang Seng Index today, largely, of course, due to some of the issues regarding those protests, where we see protesters smashing shopping malls and incidences like that. Finally, Australia, because the S&P ASX 200 is making gains of about 0.6% right now. We've got some unemployment numbers unexpectedly falling by 19,000 versus estimates of 15,000 for the month of October. The unemployment rate rose to 5.3% against estimates it would stay at 5.2%. So, of course, all of this putting a lot more pressure on the RBA to perhaps look at another rate cut. And in fact, we're seeing market conviction of about 70% of a rate cut price for mid-2020, and now almost fully priced in. And we're, of course, seeing Aussie bond yields sliding on the back of that. So RBA to be watched. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Let's talk a little bit more about Hong Kong first. Rosalind has told you where things stand right now. The unrest rising to unprecedented levels. It's again set for another day of disruptions in Hong Kong after last night's clashes between the police and protesters. The administration has meanwhile ordered for all schools to be shut for the day. That's from kindergarten all the way up to college, and the leaders have also discussed emergency powers last night. Stephen Engel of Bloomberg News gets you the latest.
For the first time in the more than 5 months unrest, all schools here in Hong Kong, so kindergartens, primary schools, also secondary schools will be closed today. Also, Hong Kong University and others have canceled the semester, so many university students will not be going back to class until January. Of course, much of this unrest in the last few days has been centered on the university campuses. There are 8 governmentally subsidized universities here in Hong Kong, and many of them have seen a rise of unrest actually on the campus greens, including Hong Kong, Chinese University of Hong Kong. And that emergency meeting that was held last night, reportedly with Carrie Lam, the chief executive, and her top officials, supposedly centered on what emergency regulations she could invoke to quell this rise in unrest, which is now, of course, spread for a 4th consecutive day during the midweek period. Usually it's been contained to the weekends. There was a general strike called on Monday, and that has continued on for the last, this would be the 4th consecutive day, including here in Central, where there were protests, there was some vandalism, there were arrests by these riot police. Again, there are more injuries also being reported, including another death, which we cannot necessarily at this moment tie to the protest, but a black-clad man was found in a pool of blood after a presumed fall. We do not know whether he was a protester or not. A 70-year-old man also said to be in critical condition in hospital. He was hit in the head with a thrown brick, and a 15-year-old is also in hospital undergoing or having undergone brain surgery after suffering a cracked skull from a canister, a tear gas canister fired by police hit him in the head.
So clearly things taking a turn for the worse. But let's turn to the other big talking point, which of course is the trade talks, where US President Donald Trump has struck an optimistic note on trade talks with China, saying that they are moving rapidly. This contradicts earlier reports that talks had hit a snag over purchase of agricultural products. Sarah McGregor of Bloomberg News gets you more.
If you're confused by the farm purchases, I think it's a club that we've all joined at this point. It seems like, it really is a political football, I guess, for China to use these purchases, of course, because farmers are a big support base from Trump. They've been some of the biggest victims of this trade war in terms of having their export market sort of cut off from them. So I think it's no surprise that if there is some disagreement about the farming purchases, it might be China trying to figure out how best to take advantage of this, how to use this to make sure that it gets, for instance, the tariff rollback that it wants. But all of that being said, we did hear from Trump today. He said that the China talks are progressing well and rapidly. But, I think we'll all really get that determination when we finally have an agreement and the two sides sit down and sign it. Until then, there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether this thing can actually be wrapped up.
Sarah, and of course with Chile now no longer, that was a natural venue for them to meet. Are we hearing any more details as to when or how this deal could be signed, or any sort of timeline going into now the end of the year?
So according to Donald Trump, it will be signed in the U.S. Of course, there are two parties in this, and China will also want to have a say in where this deal is signed. Even with the time difference, you would imagine that it would be important for both sides to agree on sort of neutral territory, perhaps a time zone that will hit either of their, media and public at a good time, not when someone's sleeping. So I think that, this is still an important aspect to be ironed out. And as of late, we're still under the assumption that this deal will be signed in the next few weeks, probably by the end of the year. But the longer it takes, it seems like we lose some momentum, and it throws a big question mark over whether it can be signed quickly this year or at all.
All right, let's also take a look at what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the rest of the big news in the globe in the First Word headlines.
We're going to start with the latest on the economic front in Japan. It slowed again in the last quarter as the global slump continued to hurt exports. However, consumer spending before last month's sales tax hike and stronger corporate investment prevented an even sharper deceleration. GDP grew at an annualized 0.2% in the September period, and that's from the previous quarter. Economists had forecast an expansion of 0.9. To Australia now, the devastating bushfires raging across eastern Australia have claimed another life. The body of a man was found outside the rural New South Wales town of Kempsey. That's about 280 miles north of Sydney. The state has borne the brunt of the fires, with 3 other fatalities in the past week. Emergency services are warning neighboring Queensland will see worsening fire conditions over the weekend. Hong Kong, meanwhile, is set for continued disruption Thursday morning after yet another night of protest clashes with police. The government has ordered all public schools to shut down for the day, the first time it's done so since the unrest began. Now, on Wednesday evening, riot police moved in to clear the streets across the city, and local media reported that top officials were gathered at Chief Executive Carrie Lam's residence. To the U.S. now, the first public hearings in the formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump have heard from the acting ambassador to Ukraine and a senior official in the State Department's European and Eurasian Bureau. Now, the two were asked if they thought Rudy Giuliani, the president's private attorney's shadow diplomacy in Ukraine, was intended to dig up dirt for political ends, and both answered yes. They both denied being opponents of the president. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to the Indian markets now, and Agam Vakil is here to set you up for the day's trade and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, not too much of a cut yesterday in the benchmark, at least, considering that we were talking about the big disappointment in the IIP numbers. Yeah. The rupee, of course, breached that 72 mark in trade. Yeah. So that was where the disappointment, I thought, was seen. But how are the markets looking today?
Right, but Alex, if you actually go on social media pages, a lot of experts out there have clearly stated that there is literally no correlation between the economy and the markets. Of course, you can't really go by that. Yeah. It's not an absolute statement, but for now, it seems like, well, things are playing out that way. We have the SGX Nifty advanced by around 0.25%. It could augur well for the indices and the way things could start here. But how about yesterday? Well, we did see weakness in the benchmarks, along with the broader markets too, moving in line. And it was, well, a mixed day for the banking indices too, but the PSU banking index declined by around 3%. And that perhaps was a little bit of a disappointment But, ADRs at this point in time are also showing weakness. Do remember Vedanta will announce earnings today. That's down 4.5%, along with Tata Motors showing some amount of weakness. And, we also have Dr. Reddy's and Wipro, which are also declining by around 2.5%. But, as far as the fund flows are concerned, FIs continue to buy, this time to the tune of 585 odd crores. And, DI is selling up to, 890 odd crores on a net basis. It's coming down to contributors. We saw Reliance Industries, TCS and Britannia will give lift to the markets and perhaps to a certain extent keep markets in check, because had it not been for something like a Reliance, the markets would have been in a lot deeper in the red. Of course, we did see a lot of weakness in ICICI Bank, HDFC Limited and ITC. These are the heavyweights, Infosys along with that. But as far as futures and options are concerned, and as we move into the final couple of weeks for the November expiry, we're seeing more accumulation of open interest towards fresh shorts in the Nifty. The Nifty banking futures are seeing unwinding coming through, and longs which were made earlier have now started to unwind, and that perhaps can be a crucial factor to keep an eye on in today's day of trade. Moving on, as far as your options, range is concerned, it still hasn't changed, but we must remember that the Nifty is banging between the range of 11,600 and 12,000. In terms of change in open interest, as one might expect, we have seen a little more writing around the higher level calls. That would include the 11,900 and the 12,000 calls. And moving on, we do have the India VIX rise by a tad, and currently at around 16.5. The Nifty put call ratio has come off quite substantially to the neutral level of 1.1 from 1.28. And as far as stocks go, we're watching out for Century Textiles. It's it's remained flat, but it's seen 45% gains there. Sun TV is the other one which saw a lot of weakness, a lot of selling in Mahanagar Gas. On the other hand, saw a lot of buying. And what about stocks which saw unwinding? Well, we do have Equitas Holdings, United Breweries, as well as something like an Escorts, all of them seeing longs unwind. United Breweries is a curious one because it's remained range bound, but over the past few days it did see a lot of accumulation. Where does it go from now? Let's wait and watch. But Alex, once again, it very likely could be about earnings, considering we are in the final couple of days of this earnings season.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. All right, let's turn to news on the economy. India's consumer price index inflation rose to 4.62% in October, which is the highest level in 16 months. But core inflation, which is reflective of the demand in the economy, fell to the lowest level in the current series. Pallavi Nahata brings you the key highlights in this report.
India's retail inflation rose to the highest in 16 months. CPI inflation rose 4.6% in October from about 4% the previous month. This is the first time since August last year that inflation has moved above the 4% mark. A Bloomberg poll of 34 economists had estimated inflation at 4.35% for the month. Inflation continues to see divergence in its subcomponents. While food prices are moving up, core inflation dropped to its lowest in the current series. Food and beverages inflation rose to 6.9% in October. Within that category, vegetable inflation spiked to 26%, while pulse prices stood at about 12%. Meat, fish and eggs also are seeing higher price levels. Even as headline inflation rose, core inflation fell to 3.4%, reflecting weak economic demand. GDP growth in Q2 is expected to weaken even further after falling to 5% in Q1. Most economists see the increase in inflation as temporary and expect average retail inflation to remain below 4% in the current financial year. The pickup in inflation is also unlikely to affect the ongoing rate cuts by India's Monetary Policy Committee when it meets in early December.
All right, the International Energy Agency released the World Energy Outlook for 2019, which says that global oil demand is likely to plateau by the year 2030. The IEA's Executive Director, Fateh Birol, believes that it will be the policies of governments of key oil consumers that will determine when the demand peak will happen. Here's a slice of the conversation that he had with Bloomberg Television.
It can go either way. What we think is with the current government policies, technology and the plans, the passenger oil demand will peak in the next 10 years or so, and the total global oil demand will plateau around 2030s and stay more or less stable. But it can go either way. If the governments take much stronger, clean, efficient technologies, push them much stronger, we may well see that the peak can happen earlier. But at the same time, if the policies of the governments do go in the other direction, we may see peak comes later. I will give you one example. When you look at the newspapers today or televisions, when we talk about the car manufacturing sector, the star is electric cars, you may think. But it's not the case. Our numbers show that the star of the manufacturing sector, car manufacturing sector, is the SUVs. In the year 2000, only 18% of the total cars sold in the world was SUVs, and last year this 18% came to 42%. 42% of all the cars sold in the world were SUVs. As we all know, for SUVs you need much more oil. If these trends continue, we may see a different oil demand trajectory, and the SUV sales are not only in United States, as you may think, but also in Europe, China, India, and even in other parts of the world. So lots of uncertainties, but our base case assumption is plateauing around 2030s global oil demand growth.
Mr. Birol, it looks like OPEC Plus isn't really interested in cutting production deeper next year. What will that mean for the market? Is there a danger that we'll see another glut?
I think three factors here. One is on the production side. Again, significant amount of oil will come from the United States, but also from Norway, from Canada, from Brazil, from Guyana. Significant amount of this oil coming. Second, global economy is not doing very well. Therefore, demand will be rather weak. And on top of that, it is important what the OPEC plus Russia will do. And in that context, I don't expect any price spike risk for the consumers.
All right, so no spike. Oil prices, by the way, Brent crude, the last time I checked was just above that $62 per barrel mark. So it's not really doing anything as of now. It was very volatile a while back. And speaking of oil prices, lower oil prices are likely to impact ONGC's second quarter earnings. The company's bottom line, though, is likely to be higher owing to higher dividend and a lower tax rate. Somit Sarkar is here to take you through the key expectations. Good morning, Somit. What are we looking at?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with the headline numbers first. The revenues are expected to be down by nearly 7% to close to 24,700 crore rupees. The EBITDA is expected to be down by nearly 13%. Margins are expected to come in lower at around 53%, while the net profit is expected to be higher by nearly 6% to close to 6,267 crore rupees. Now, sequentially, it is expected to be a weak quarter because of lower oil prices, and that's the reason the net realizations are also expected to be lower at around $62 per barrel versus $66 per barrel in the last quarter of financial year 2020. However, the net profit is expected to be higher because of a higher dividend income and the likely adoption of the lower corporate tax rate in the second quarter of financial year 2020. On the operation side, if you see, the crude oil production and sales are expected to be higher compared to last quarter, while the gas production and sales numbers are expected to be lower compared to last quarter. Now, crude production is expected to be higher by 0.7%, while gas production is expected to be down by nearly 2.6%. On the sales side, the crude sales are expected to be higher by nearly 2.2%, while the gas sales are expected to be lower by nearly 2%. Now, all these assumptions are based on the fact that there won't be any subsidy burden on ONGC. Now, key things to watch out for would include the development plan for KG Basin for company, along with this, the capex and the production guidance that the company gives, and any updates on debt repayment related to HPCL funding would be important to watch out for from ONGC earnings today.
Thanks so much for that, Somit. All right, sticking with earnings, lower volumes and realizations are expected to hurt Vedanta's earnings in the September quarter. Nikki Mirchandani is standing by with what the street is pricing in.
Well, we're expecting subdued quarter coming in from Vedanta. Top line, we're expecting a 13% decline in terms of operational performance too. We're expected to see a decline of more than 10%. Essentially, it's the volume and the prices as the realization, which is expected to weigh on the earning performance of the company. Three key earning divisions of the company, that is Zinc India, aluminium and oil and gas, they put together, we're expected to see a decline there. Zinc India rather has reported numbers, and that's a 9.1% downtick there on account of volume, lower volume and lower LME prices. The story is a little different for Zinc International business, given that that business is expected to see a sharp bump up in the operational performance of the company on account of ramp up of Gamsberg mine. Oil and gas, that also EBITDA is expected to contract there due to lower crude prices and degrowth in volumes. The same trend follows for aluminium division as a whole, but then it's essentially also the higher coal cost which is expected to hit the performance of aluminium division. To an extent, that has been capped by the lower alumina cost as a whole, but the net we're expecting a degrowth coming in even from the aluminium division, steel division, and so to say the closure which is expected to continue to weigh down on the copper business for yet another quarter. Things that we like to watch out from the earnings, apart from the EBITDA performance, will be the progress of Gamsberg mine, how the volume ramp up is panning out there, the movement in base metal price, and obviously the commentary on the cost pressures as a whole.
All right, that's to do with earnings. Amit Sarkar is back now to tell you all about the stocks in news. Amit, we've already spoken about a couple of big earnings today. What are we looking at with regard to the rest of the stocks?
Well, a bunch of results that came in yesterday. Firstly, SpiceJet, the results were below estimates. The company reported a strong top-line growth, but the yield were lower for the company. Now, lower yield was due to a rising competitive intensity that we have been seeing in the industry. However, the company's other income was higher as the company accounted for claims worth nearly 177 crore rupees that are receivables from Boeing. Now, mark-to-market foreign exchange losses and higher cost impacted the financials in the second quarter. For SpiceJet, Pidilite Industries results were below estimates. The net profit was aided by a deferred tax reversal. The near-term outlook was uncertain as the consumer and the bazaar segment has degrown in this quarter. Along with this, liquidity crunch, a prolonged monsoon and attendant disruption also dented the top line of the company in the second quarter. The margins were dented on account of lower revenues and higher advertisement costs. Blue Star, the results were above estimates. The MAT credit reversal and higher other income aided the financials. Execution of healthy order book aided the revenue growth in the EMP segment, where it was around 24%, while the AC segment reported a revenue growth of nearly 10% compared to last year. Bata results were in line with analyst estimates. The revenue growth was on a high base of 15% last year. The growth was on the back of new campaigns and the attractive product launches done by the company. The retail channels continued to grow, aided by premiumization, while lower effective tax rate boosted the net profit of the company. Aarti Industries, the results were below estimates. However, the numbers were operationally in line. The revenues were down nearly 22% due to weakness seen in the specialty chemical business, while the margins were aided by lower raw material costs and the net profit was aided by lower finance costs. Rights, strong results held higher other income and deferred tax reversal aided the net profit. Other income recognized towards a recovery of principal. Other income was higher because they have recognized some recovery of principal amount of arbitration proceedings, while margins were impacted on account of higher costs towards turnkey projects. On the other results, Muthoot Finance, Thermax, Apex Frozen Food reported a strong set of numbers. Lemon Tree Hotels, IRCTC and Phenolix Cables reported in-line set of numbers, while Nalco, BHEL and Cadila Healthcare reported a weak set of numbers. In other stocks to watch, firstly, Aurobindo Pharma, where the Unit 4 plant has received 14 observations from US FDA in a recent inspection. It's a key injectable formulation plant, and around 47 pending filings are there from this plant, and it contributes nearly 30% of the overall filings. Now, telecom stocks will also remain in focus because the Department of Telecommunication has asked the telecom companies to pay the AGR dues within the next 3 months. Now, Bharti Airtel, according to the PTI report, Bharti Airtel has dues worth nearly 62,000 crore rupees, while Vodafone Idea has dues worth nearly 54,000 crore rupees. Lastly, VST Industries, where Radhakishan Damani has acquired 2.7 lakh shares, that is 1.75% stake in the company at close to 4,260 rupees per share, while HDFC Mutual Fund was the seller in this case.
All right, thanks so much for that, Amit. Turning to politics now, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has come out in defense of the Maharashtra governor and in turn the cabinet's decision to impose president's rule in the state. The BJP party president also challenged the Shiv Sena, NCP and Congress to form a government in the state.
राज्यपाल महोदय ने कहीं पर भी संविधान को तोड़ने मरोड़ने का कोई प्रयास नहीं किया। जहाँ तक ये पर्टिकुलर सवाल जो आपका है कि 8:30 तक का शाम का समय दिया था और बीच में राज्यपाल महोदय ने राष्ट्रपति शासन की अनुशंसा कैसे की, मैं आपको बता दूं कि शायद वो अपने साथी को पूछते नहीं हैं। लगभग 11:30 से 12 के बीच में एनसीपी ने पत्र लिखकर अपनी असमर्थता जता दी थी कि आज शाम 8:30 बजे तक हम सरकार नहीं बना सकते। एक संवैधानिक पद को राजनीति के अंदर इस तरह से घसीटना मैं नहीं मानता लोकतंत्र के लिए स्वस्थ परंपरा है। और जिनको भी मौका चाहिए उनको आज भी मौका है। उल्टा उनको तो 2 दिन मांगते थे, हमने 6 महीना दे दिया है। मैं आज कहना चाहता हूं कि राज्यपाल महोदय ने सबको 6 महीने का समय दे दिया, बनाओ भाई सरकार। जो लोग कहते हैं कि हमें मौका नहीं दे दिया गया, राष्ट्रपति महोदय ने राज्यपाल महोदय ने बड़ा गैर संवैधानिक काम कर दिया है, हमारा मौका छीन लिया, डेमोक्रेसी में हमारा राइट है, मैं उनको कहना चाहता हूं कि आपका राइट आज भी है, आपके पास संख्या नहीं। आपके पास अगर संख्या है तो आप जाकर सरकार बना लीजिए। पहले से था सार्वजनिक प्रचार में मैंने कम से कम 100 बार कहा, प्रधानमंत्री जी ने कई बार कहा और स्वयं देवेंद्र फडणवीस ने कई बार कहा कि अगर हमारी यूटी की सरकार आती है, बहुमत आता है तो मुख्यमंत्री देवेंद्र फडणवीस बनेंगे। किसी ने कॉन्ट्राडिक्ट नहीं किया।
All right, clearly lots more to talk about over the course of the day. For all the news and updates, do subscribe to notifications on the website BloombergQuint.com or follow us on Telegram. Thanks so much for watching. This is Bloomberg Quint.